Lawyer discovers his wife's affair and decides to take nuclear revenge. Vincent DeLuca had spent 15 years crafting a life of prestige and power. As the trusted lawyer for New York's most notorious crime families, he was both respected in legal circles and feared in the shadows. His sharp mind had kept dangerous men out of prison, and in return he had secured their loyalty. But beyond his career, Vincent's world revolved around one person, his wife, Julia. To him, she was his sanctuary, until the day he discovered she had betrayed him. The revelation came during a casual meeting at a cigar lounge with one of his longtime clients, Tony Rizzo, a mid-level capo for the Rossi family. Tony leaned in with a smirk, lighting his cigar as if he were about to share a joke. "Vinny, you ever hear the one about the husband who thought he had the perfect wife?" Vincent barely glanced up. "Not interested, Tony." Tony chuckled. "No joke, pal. I saw your wife last night. Midtown Hotel. She wasn't alone." Vincent's grip tightened around his cigar. "You sure?" Tony slid his phone across the table. The screen displayed a photo of Julia, hand in hand with another man, walking into an upscale hotel. Vincent felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He had spent years navigating high-stakes negotiations and courtroom battles, but nothing had ever blindsided him like this. He stood abruptly, leaving Tony's laughter behind as he walked out. That night, Vincent didn't go home. Instead, he made a few calls. For years, he had done favors for dangerous men. Now it was time to call in some debts. First, he needed information. He called in favors from private investigators, dirty cops, and informants he had helped over the years. They tracked Julia's movements, dug through her phone records, and even hacked into hotel reservation systems. Surveillance footage confirmed her routine. Always the same nights, always the same room. Vincent had men tailing her discreetly, snapping photos, logging timestamps, and even recording conversations when possible. No more than a week later, he knew everything. The affair had been going on for months, twice a week, always the same hotel. The man? Eric Conway, a financial analyst, a nobody who had no idea he had tangled with the wrong husband. By the end of the week, Vincent had a comprehensive file on Eric, his home address, workplace, financial records, and even past legal troubles. He knew which bars he frequented, who his friends were, and most importantly, what he feared. A few well-placed threats to Eric's colleagues and acquaintances confirmed one thing. Eric was completely unaware of who he had crossed. That was about to change. Now it was time to act. That Friday, Vincent watched from his car as Julia and Eric entered their usual hotel. He took a deep breath and made a call. Minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. Two men stepped out. Luca and Frankie, men Vincent had kept out of prison more times than he could count. They entered the hotel moving like ghosts. Vincent followed, taking his time. "Room 714, Frankie knocked. "Room service?" Footsteps. The door creaked open. The moment Eric registered the strangers, Luca's fist met his jaw, sending him sprawling. Julia screamed, clutching the sheets as Vincent stepped inside. Vincent's voice was ice. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "Vincent." He ignored her. Instead, he crouched beside Eric, who was groaning on the floor. Frankie twisted his arm behind his back, eliciting a sharp cry. Vincent's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You had the guts to touch my wife." Eric panicked. "I didn't know." Vincent's fist drove into his ribs. "You knew!" Another punch to his face. "You don't touch another man's wife and walk away." Julia sobbed, but Vincent didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he pulled an envelope from his coat and tossed it onto the bed beside her. "Divorce papers, signed and notarized. You get nothing." "Vincent, please." He held up a hand. "Save it." 15 years, Julia. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" His voice held no emotion. "You're dead to me." Julia reached for him, but he stepped back, his expression one of disgust. "Did you love him?" She hesitated. That was enough. He turned to Luca and Frankie. They understood. Eric, barely able to stand, was dragged into the hallway. His punishment wasn't over. Before leaving, Vincent glanced at Julia one last time. "Pack your things. You have until morning." She sobbed harder, but Vincent didn't stay to hear it. He walked out, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Behind him, Eric's whimpers echoed as Luca and Frankie continued their work. The cool night air felt different. He had been a fool to believe in love, but at least he wasn't a fool anymore. Betrayal had a price, and Vincent always made sure debts were paid. He slid into his car and made one last call. "It's done. Keep an eye on her. If she steps out of line again, I want to know." A voice on the other end simply replied, "Understood." Vincent lit his cigar and exhaled the smoke into the night. There was still work to do. The next morning, Vincent received a message from his private investigator, a live feed of Julia sitting in their penthouse, her bags packed, hands trembling. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed from crying. She kept glancing at her phone as if expecting a call that would never come. Every few minutes, she would wipe her face and take a deep breath, only to collapse into silent sobs again. Guilt, fear, or regret? Vincent didn't care anymore. She had been his queen. Now she was nothing. At noon, she left. Vincent had already seen to it that her bank accounts were frozen, her cards canceled. She wouldn't live off his wealth. Eric, however, suffered a worse fate. Found in an alley 3 blocks from the hotel, his face was barely recognizable, his body battered. He lived, but just barely. Vincent didn't want him dead. He wanted him to remember. As Vincent watched Julia's cab disappear, he felt nothing. No anger, no regret, just silence. The past was dead, and Vincent DeLuca was ready to move forward. The past was truly dead. Vincent never saw Julia again. As for Eric, he would live the rest of his life remembering his mistake, a broken man who had learned a painful lesson. Vincent moved on, his name untarnished, his empire intact. Without Julia, life became simpler, cleaner. He poured himself into his work, surrounding himself with those who truly respected him. The men he had helped, the connections he had built, all remained steadfast by his side. One evening, as he sat in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey in hand, laughter echoed from the other room. Friends, allies, his chosen family. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also freed him. He had shed a false love and emerged stronger, wiser. With a final exhale of smoke, Vincent DeLuca closed the chapter on his past and embraced the future. There were no regrets, only the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The king remained on his throne, not alone but surrounded by loyalty that would never waver. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. He had cut out the rot, removed the weakness. Love had been an illusion, but power? Power was real. One evening, as he once again sat in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey in hand, he looked over the city he had conquered. There were no more betrayals waiting in the shadows. He had ensured it. Then his phone buzzed. A message, anonymous number. 3 words. "You made enemies?" Vincent smirked, flicking cigar ash into the wind. Let them come.